So I'm Min Tae Kim, not Min Tai Kim. Had to correct them many, many times. That's okay. From Virginia Tech. I'll be talking about a studio that I ran last semester. And this is my fourth studio about the same site. So I have some different insight than other presentations. And this fourth one was different than three other ones in that I had only 4 students in it. Very small class, and those students were the weakest among all of the classes. So I don't have too many things to talk about their product, but I'd rather talk about the changes from last year and changes in my perspective about teaching geodesign. So let's start with that. So just to give you an introduction about the project first. This is a project done for the city of Virginia Beach, which is the second most vulnerable sea level rise city on the east coast of the United States. And lots of troubles. The population is increasing. Their real estate is collapsing. The market is collapsing right now. The homes that are millions of dollars are not selling because they can't be insured. And so they're just renting out, and lots of problems. That actually changed the attitude in the city officials. So I'll talk about that. So, okay, so first 2 studios that I taught was not geodesign. Third studio was the project that I presented last year, and this is the 4th one. And I learned a lot teaching last year's geodesign, and I want to talk about that first. At the Digital Landscape Architecture Conference, I presented that the idea of a language of geodesign. I got a realization last year when I came here and saw 60-something posters, and I couldn't understand all of them. I mean, not in depth, but I could see that what they were talking about, using what kind of language, the language that was presented by IGC. That was very insightful. And so I talked about that as a keynote speaker at the Digital Landscape Architecture. And I'm using that language that I kind of presented, but basically it's IGC language to teach all of my classes now. I'm teaching 3 courses, and they are learning the IGC method. So I'm not even using geodesign, I'm using the IGC as a language of courses. So they've been using that. Okay, so a little about that a little later. I don't have much time, but the changes that happened over the past years, that 8 years that I taught. When I went to Virginia Beach with students for the first studio, students are greatly disappointed when they learned that city was not prepared and they were not even thinking. One student asked how much sea level rise they were expecting. One person, there was a small iPhone, brought out the iPhone. Conservatively this, progressively this, 2 inches versus 4 inches. That attitude has changed over 8 years. Now they are officially recognizing in their documents that sea level will rise 4.5 feet. So there was no conversation when students asked for answers for that 8 years ago. Not last year, the 2 years ago when we went, the city council formed a Blue Ribbon Council and a committee. They were very much engaged. So I was able to kind of adopt, not fully adopt the workshop done as in Carl's method, but we had a great opportunity to kind of include the conversation in our projects. And this year, with 4 students, I couldn't have that kind of opportunity, so that's changed. And so because of the predicament the city's in, they are sued for a community permit that they gave 12 years ago. Very new community, permit that they gave, and that community is already flooded by sea level rise, not directly inundation, but the flooding, more frequent events. And the city is sued by the community for $23 million for remediation. And now they are realizing that this is not okay anymore, the old frame. Virginia Beach, by the way, is one of the most conservative cities in the country, and they are changing it. Okay, so that. And so the attitude has changed, and they are realizing also the tax revenue coming out of these expensive homes are not going to be there anymore. A lot of things are happening there. So my teaching over the years have changed. It was me leading all the teaching studio method, and now with the help of IGC language, students can just, with me introducing the concept in the beginning of class, they are doing the work. It's really important to have very informational IGC website. Using that, they are following the rules. And last year I was scolded for not following the rules. This year I didn't have to do too much because students were understanding the website, the method. They were speaking the language that was presented by the IGC website. So it was great. And it's getting easier and easier to teach these students. And so thank you for doing the work. And I'll continue to use this in my GIS class and then a studio class. Okay, I'm losing the track of my thoughts here. Normally I teach the studio at a city scale. Last year the experiment was using the whole entire city, that's 40 kilometers by 40 kilometers. And they created the system. I don't do much since they had the GIS skills. I don't do much in terms of creating the systems evaluation maps. They were doing it. This year with 4 students, very weak students, they couldn't do it, and they could get the, 2 minutes, get the systems map from last year. They could recycle because it was the same language they could understand. And so there was that benefit, repeating the same site and then using the same systems. They were able to produce something interesting. And so we didn't spend too much time on it, but they could use it, understand it. But at the same time, they realized that the 10 systems at 40 kilometer by 40 kilometer scale was not really appropriate for their 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer scale site. So since I have 2 minutes, these are the problems the city is facing. Lots of roads are permanently now inundated. So the picture there up in the middle, top middle, you can see that that's always inundated anytime. And the people there have to drive there all the time in the water. The city and government entities are giving $100,000 to raise homes by 8 feet. It's grant that is given. But you can actually see 2 identical houses in that photo, middle photo. Left side is not raised, right side is raised 8 feet. And if they cannot get there, what happens? So the entire infrastructure has to be improved. So the main effort students gave to solve this problem was really that not really dwellable areas in the future. So they should totally migrate people out, and they were using, in those spots, those homes that are lost, using that with a naturalistic treatment. Living shoreline was introduced, and so they were creating this wetlands to buffer the homes that are relatively safe from the danger of the sea level rise. So my lesson here, since my time is up, is that geodesign as a language really helped me teach the class better. Students learned the method of landscape planning much better, and they understood. They could communicate among themselves, and they could communicate with the predecessors in a way presented by them to them. Okay. So. Okay.
Excellent example of time management there. Just when the bell went off. And next presenter is Tom Fisher from the University of Minnesota, and he's going to talk to us about a Minneapolis Green New Deal. Thank you, Tom.
Good, Brian. Yes, for those of you who may not follow U.S. politics, the Green New Deal is a proposal that a group of Democratic Congress people have put forward based on the idea of the New Deal that existed in the U.S. in the 1930s. And our team really thought we would look at what is the relationship of the Green New Deal to the SDGs, was one question we had. And then what will the Green New Deal actually look like on the ground? I mean, how would it actually affect a real city? So we took this section of Minneapolis right here, which includes the downtown. There's a very wealthy neighborhood immediately south of the downtown, the poorest neighborhood in the city just north of it, and a kind of working class neighborhood on the other side of the Mississippi River. And this is the Mississippi River that moves right through the middle of the site. As you can see from this slide, some of the Green New Deal goals include net zero greenhouse gas emissions, millions of green economy jobs. Actually has a full employment aspect to it. Infrastructure, green infrastructure investments, clean air and water, prioritized this idea of justice and equity, which also includes a lot of retraining of people who will be losing their jobs as we shift to a green economy. Really trying to understand the ways in which this would work out in both an early adopter, late adopter, and non-adopter scenario. These are just some images of this sort of centrality of the river as it goes through the city, and then some of the infrastructure that we are looking at changing over time. So these are just some of the requirements: reducing inequality, transitioning to a green economy, achieving full employment, adapting to climate change, and switching to 100% renewable energy. One of the other driving ideas behind this work was the notion that cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Twin Cities, will probably be destination cities in the era of climate change. There's a lot of fresh water. It's pretty far north. It's way inland. And so there's an expectation that, in fact, how will these cities deal with a lot of people who may be arriving to this part of the country? And part of this project is to really help the decision makers and the political leaders in the area begin to address the idea that instead of a city which is 3.5 million people growing by another million, it could grow by another 5 million. It could grow at a kind of exponential rate. And we believe that the city isn't really ready for it. This is just some background on Minneapolis, and it has long had a humanitarian tradition. There are many of the dominant groups in the city are from other countries. We have a very large Hmong population that was brought there after the Vietnam War. We have a very large Somali Ethiopian population, and that diversity has really greatly enriched the city. And so part of this was also to think about how it could continue to be a welcoming city for immigrants in a country that seems to no longer want immigrants. And so there's a strong part of this of the Twin Cities and that region in opposition to this country, somehow trying to envision a different future for the United States than the one that's coming out of Washington, D.C. So our early adopter scenario begins to look at what happens if we, in fact, move all the industry off of the Mississippi River and allow it to, and let it become urban agriculture to handle the expected flooding that is going to continue to happen along the river. We looked at a lot of community-based economic development in all of the neighborhoods with commercial corridors that encourage local economic activity and wealth creation in those communities. We are working in my center on the impact of autonomous vehicles, and so we actually looked at what would happen if the highways are no longer there for moving vehicles, because a lot of our research shows that autonomous vehicles actually avoid highways, and so we're going to have these highway corridors that become possibly available for other uses, for economic development uses. And we also have looked at the ways in which we could bring greater equity and employment through a dual economy. There's some work that we're doing around a second currency, the idea of community service dollars. So people could be paid in local currency to boost local economic development for work they do in their communities. So there was a whole economic idea behind it. The late adopter scenario tries to get to the same end, but of course there's this delay which leads to a lot of wasted investment, a lot of continued investment in the carbon economy, in automobiles and automobile infrastructure. And so the city is behind as well. One of the things we envision by 2035 is that environmental refugees are starting to arrive in the city. And so some of what we were looking at was how people who have been displaced start to occupy the golf courses, all of the open land, the public land. And so starting to see fairly large squatter settlements starting to appear in the city because the city is unprepared for the numbers of people who are in fact arriving. And then the non-adopter scenario not only sees extensive flooding along the river, but flooding in neighborhoods. Large sections of the neighborhood become flooded. Large squatter settlements occupying almost all the open land, and as well turning parts of the city into a kind of police state where the wealthy neighborhoods of the south actually are gated and walled off from the poor neighborhood, which is immediately adjacent to it. So the non-adopter scenario is not only politically unacceptable, but economically a disaster for the city. And so this was just a kind of summary of the SDGs that we looked at and the ways in which the SDGs and the Green New Deal goals overlap. And so we think that the Green New Deal needs to link more effectively into what the UN is trying to do, and we think that that would actually help move it forward in Congress. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. There is hope for us. Thank you. Appreciate that. Our next speaker is Paulo Pellegrino from the University of Sao Paulo, and he's going to talk to us about a green infrastructure for the new Pineal River.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm present here the results of a studio that I gave last semester, and it was very timely because at the time of the studios you have to choose our subject for this course, and now at the same time the state government was launching a project for with the name of the new Pineal River, and so we thought, wow, okay, that's a good opportunity to see if this project, the state-sponsored project, could be more holistic in its approach. How we can give some smaller contributions or try to think more about, besides the box of that hard engineering solutions that were followed by this project, the official project, because they came from the same old school of engineering that is being in charge of the city, of the hydrological process of the city since last century. It was an American engineer from a Canadian company, Light and Power. They decided that nature did all wrong inside, and they decided to make better this nature. So they changed the rivers, they changed the course of the rivers, they see those useless marshlands as something that should be put in the markets. So they destroyed all the natural features of the basin, of the sedimentary basin where the city is located. So this tradition of engineering, in a hard engineering way, that make all the rivers channels and all the areas dry as a desert in an area that used to be very, very wet, and it receives a lot of rain sometimes, and became more and more when you talk about climate change. São Paulo has already suffered this climate change. In the last 30 years, the city got 2 to 3 degrees centigrade Celsius more hotter than it used to be. And the rains that used to be more dispersed, now it's concentrated in very heavy events. So anyway, what you decide to do here is how you cannot start to give some contribution in thinking about how in a landscape model you can start to put some of those devices for a more sustainable way of dealing with this main river, the Pineal River, one of the main rivers of the city, how you can make this a more feasible way of working. So we decided that some of the requirements should be to ensure greater sustainability of water quality through the use of green infrastructure elements, most of our ideas, but in several scales, not only in the scale of a local project, but more in a dispersed, more open network around all the watersheds. favor great urban resilience in this way in face of extreme weather events and adaptation and mitigation using these landscape-based solutions. And also, one of the most intriguing problems in the city, that when the engineers try to make all the channels, they put all the freeways above the rivers. So you have a kind of problem that everybody is now in a trap, because you need to drive and to be in the public transport above the rivers, and now the rivers are taking back their room. That's very good, in some way. Just last week, we have a huge flooding city, and all this new infrastructure that they were built in the last decades were absolutely overflowed. So they said, oh no, well, that's problems because we had our calculations in the past, and now we need to look for future rains. Okay, but anyway, how you can have a more flexible and open network that can help working in this, give more resilience for the system. So some of these innovations you're looking for were like those related to bioorientation, water crisis, of course, because at the same time you need more water access, resilient landscape infrastructure integrated with stormwater infrastructure, linear parks and all other kind of green spaces, green roofs, green streets, everything green, and a permeable pavement and all other scales. And one thing that we tried to apply in this exercise was one way of make a matrix of distribution between these several elements of landscape-based infrastructure devices, following this geomorphology of the site. So you took a small watershed as a pilot and tried to put inside them where we have places for infiltration, places for detention, and places for spreading the water. So depending on the conditions of the soil and topography, you can make this difference. And so you make some calculations, some simulations about that, and saw that just in the beginning, in this small pilots, you can be able to put most of the water that are needed for retention in these landscape devices. And if you spread this more evenly through the watersheds, you can get a lot of this water that, in detention and retention inside the small tributaries, and perhaps you can make a more sustainable way of giving for the main river the quality and the volume of water that's not so dangerous. Anyway, you got this way to thinking about what's the better river could be in the end of this process. Treating this since the first flush to all this detention to the final. And also given all the other uses that will be necessary, because as you see, we are looking for those goals, and they were mixing with the idea that in the beginning, in the ending, of course, we are trying to make efforts to change again this hard surface of the city that was the legacy that you receive from these engineers, and now try to make this with landscape architects something that could be more able to adapt to these new levels of waters. And some views of the future, because these are some ideas that you could be able to charge in the future if you start to be early adopters of the process. But even if you are in a not so earlier, you can be able to do that if you try to put this green infrastructure back to the solutions. Anyway, what we found in this exercise was a way to put together some of the several projects that have been developed in my lab, my laboratory, that's Lab Verde, when we try to make these studies of how you can recreate the river and the hydrology for this new nature that cities should be able to support. And so I think geodesign will be a nice tool to give all these stakeholders, because this is very complex and impossible to give one solution for this idea. And you need to be able to put together all these people, all these different interests, all the litigation that came from this process. And I think geodesign will be a wonderful tool to help us achieve that. That's it.
Thank you, Paulo. Our next speakers are Haoting Li and Yanxi Zhou from Texas A&M University. They're going to be talking about prediction modeling and urban analytics in resilient design.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yanzi Zhao.
My name is Haoting Li.
We are from Texas A&M University. Today, our topic is integrating prediction modeling and urban analytics into scenario-based resilience design. This project is located in Tampa, on Tampa Bay, along the Florida Gulf Coast. This city is known as a major business center and also a tourism destination. However, it is very vulnerable and sensitive to the climate change. Well, it is the top 5 U.S. cities most vulnerable to the hurricane. And we selected this 3 square mile site as our area as our site, and we used the land transformation model to predict the potential future urban growth according to 3 different scenarios. Here's the output of the urban growth prediction. The map shows the land transformation model, urban development prediction overlapped with 3 different floodplain scenario. And the non-adopter scenario means continual growth according to comprehensive master plan. The non-adopter scenario means basically growth based on the existing development condition. The late adopter scenario, which is grow resiliently, that means there will be no new development in current floodplain. And in the right hand is the SDG impact for 3 different scenarios. And you could see the late adapter scenario have the higher score than the other 2. And we have summarized that the top 3 SDG impact, there are industry, innovation, and institution, and the sustainable community and cities, and also the climate action. Next page, we are talking about the requirement of this project. We will assume Tampa population will continue grow, and the city will not expand out anymore. And when people move in, there will be this area will be more urbanized. And also, the global economy will grow, and it also causes the fast of emerging markets. The global temperature will rise, and it will affect the climate change and also the sea level rise. Last but not least is the pollution in this coastal line area. And in the innovation use, we will include some hydrology strategy, a different form of the agriculture, and also a significant amount of green infrastructure. Also, we will have some mixed-use development in this area. And we will use this different land use to distribute 3 master plans based on different scenarios.
So what we did was we used the land transformation model to predict. So the land transformation model is a GIS-based program to help predict the future urban conditions. So in this case, we just predicted by the scenario. So we restricted the development into exclusionary area. So for example, for the community planned region, so we restricted the development in the environmentally sensitive area that the city says there's no development. So for the resilient ones, we restricted the new development in the floodplain. So we lay the future urban growth prediction model out over the NOAA sea level rise prediction. So we can see we have 3 different prediction maps. So there are the current floodplain, the high floodplain, and the extreme floodplain. So we can see from the map that there are going to be 8.4% of the building in the current floodplain, and the number will change to 11% in the high floodplain. and it will finally go to 32% in the extreme floodplain. Also, the people at risk will increase from 2,000 to 6,000. And also the flood risk development will change from $150 million to almost $500 million. So before we come to the master plan, we have many design strategies, which is mainly based on 6 key things. So we want to remediate the ecological environment, and also we want to create space for active and healthy living, build up the hydrological infrastructure to store, retain, and to block the runoff for the sea level rise. Also, we try to increase the sustainable transportation, and we try to help develop the local economy and create more incubators to help the city growth. And finally, we try to do more adaptive and more resilient design, such as adaptive architecture to in the floodplain. So we did 3 different master plan based on each predicted scenario. So the non-adopter is a lot more single family, and this is how they want to grow according to the current development pattern. So the earlier adopter, we try to make it based on the future land use plan. So for the late adopter, we increased more mixed use and more density in the higher development area, because we don't want any development in the floodplain. So the key things is that the land transformation model predicts the same amount of the development across all 3 scenarios. So, and we just refigured in the different spaces and densities. Also, we did a LFM model, low impact spreadsheet across each scenario to test the impacts. So basically, for the non-adapter, if we keep building like what we want it to be, so there will have 21% increase in the total pollutant. But for the early adapter, because we based on the future land use plan, so we will have a slightly less increase. It's about 2% increase. But for the late adapter, we will have like 30% decrease in the total pollutant. Also, for the average annual runoff volume and average annual runoff depths, for the late adapter, it will also decrease. So that's all for our project. And finally, we want to, thanks to our Professor Galen Newman and also Professor Dongying Li, and also thanks to the National Institute of the Environmental Health Science for funding for our project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another good on-time presentation. Next presentation is Lisa DeRussell from Penn State University. Her topic is Musser Gap to Valleylands project.
All right. My name is Lisa DeRussell. I am from the Pennsylvania State University, where I am a visiting professor of landscape architecture and also a practitioner in residence. In addition to my colleague Dan Meehan here from the Geodesign program, are really excited to be here at IGC. It's my first time. We're going to share with you today a project that has been 2 years in the making, which is called Musser Gap to Valleylands project. Ultimately, this project was a charge by our university president, Eric Barron, to really think about how the university can lead a community conversation to build public trust. The site here is located in a really unique landscape. It is located in central Pennsylvania, as you can see, very close to Penn State University. We were specifically looking at the area outlined in orange here, our study area, about 355 acres, primarily conventional farmland, corn, soybeans. What's interesting is that our site also sits right next to a creek, which provides drinking water to the local community. President's vision was to really think about the local ecology, to really create a space where people can come and enjoy nature, learn about the environment, and to just be inspired. We started this project in fall of 2018, doing what a landscape architecture course would do, a traditional deep dive, analytically into the site, looking at context, land use, looking at slope, just being on site to observe things. We then moved into spring 2019, where we really started to think about the community using both analog tools, the traditional charrette, with digital tools, including Geodesign Hub, ArcMap, GeoPlanner, a bunch of other stuff, to really create a very, in my eyes, awesome community conversation strategy that started to blend these tools together. I'm going to pass it off to Dan, and he's going to talk a little bit about our geodesign strategy.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, in this part of the phase, we use Geodesign Hub, Harishi Bilal's tool, and Carl's as well. But we had the students go through, and they digitized all that information that we gathered from those from stakeholder meetings, from the community conversations. They digitized them, created the diagrams. We split them into thematic teams so they could then begin to create designs from the diagrams. So we went with passive recreation, habitat creation, kind of agritourism. Minimal intervention one was kind of let's not do much to the land, and then one talked about water preservation. So that culminated the end of the spring semester. The students presented those design ideas, again, back to the public. The president was involved kind of throughout the process as well. But what we did after that, during the summer and the fall, we decided to do kind of a faculty staff-led process, not only with faculty within our school, but we talked to folks with agro and forestry and agriculture, geography. We try to include other respective subject matter experts. But we went through, we took all that information, synthesized it, and then took it to the decision makers. We sat down, we had individual meetings with the leadership teams from the facilities and planning. I sat down with the president, with the business and finance guy, folks, and then local government and community relations. So each one of those four groups picked chose their diagrams they wanted to see, created a design, and then we did the standard, where do we have agreement? And which of those, and that's what you see on the right here, that's small, meant to be small, but where do we have agreement among our stakeholders? Which one of those projects also meet the values? And then we use that to basically come out with the top 7 ideas that are now being passed on to a consultant to complete. So this is actually happening. It's out for an RFP right now. So I'm actually going to go talk about this one first. Our requirements were, the population will continue to grow. We'll have a more smart environment. The fresh water will be more scarce, and food production pressures will increase. And then you can see all the innovations that we chose. Mainly, I'd like to point out that we went kind of like a lot of non-human stuff, a lot of green infrastructure, and the residential areas really kind of popped up. How can we kind of mitigate where those residential areas are going to end up? Which is kind of, what kind of shows in our scenarios. You can see in the early adopter, we have a lot of green infrastructure, and really we concentrated on this middle part here. It's this middle section, because this is our suburban area. This is our natural area where we have a beautiful Rothrock forest, a lot of hiking and biking, and in the middle is kind of this is currently the ag area, but we want to maintain that that's a pristine area. It stays undeveloped. So you can see kind of in our late non-adopter scenario, you can see how much orange we have in there to show this is where all that residential is going to end up if it goes unchecked. But with smart design and planning, we can conserve a lot of this area. We can commit it to green infrastructure, to forestry, to agritourism, and other actions. So yeah, I think that's pretty much. And did I miss anything, Lisa?
Do we have time? Maybe. So I would say that if we could go back and do this project again, there were a lot of lessons learned, because ultimately much of the work was done prior to us committing to IGC. And so really, this was almost a projection of everything that we had learned thus far from the president of the university, from our work with the community, from our analytical deep dive. And so really, I like to think of this as almost an appendage or a prospective scenario that we started to look at to really think about some of these major consensus ideas that came into play. I think if we could go back and do this all over again, we probably would truly focus more on those non-human systems what we found throughout the entire process is that everyone was really wanted to preserve water resources. They wanted to think about the next generation of agriculture. They recognized that the agriculture was really part of the cultural heritage of State College, and especially Penn State as an agricultural university. They really thought about ways in which they could really make a name for themselves along the microbrew and craft winery trail. And so thinking about ways to now start to integrate the idea of agriculture and cultural heritage with what we might see in the future. And so as much of a landscape architect as I am, for me, I think that this project goes beyond the, simple, okay, let's plan for development here. We recognize that we needed to do that. But I said, Dan, we don't have to put it everywhere on our site. The borough is much bigger. Let's only put 50% of it here. And so ultimately, next time around, I would, certainly really advocate for those kind of non-human systems and really build out, more specifically at perhaps even a finer scale, what some of those green, whether it is the engineering green infrastructure term or more curated parkland or just natural systems, coupling that with more of the water policies that we really saw come to light through our discussions with community and the university. So with that, thank you very much. We're going to be presenting this again at the summit in a lot more detail in 8 minutes, so look forward to talking about it again then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa and Dan. Our next presentation is from, I'm just checking who's going to speak, is from Brian Deal and Yongxin Kwak from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and they're going to be talking about evidence-based design, zero and infinity in Chicago.
My job is to introduce Yun-Shin, one of our excellent PhD students at Illinois. You'll hear from another tomorrow. This was a studio we did together this past semester, and I'm coming to the conclusion my job is to help train the next group of conductors. So.
Hello, everyone. Last semester, my advisor, Professor Brian Deal, and I opened a graduate studio class named Evidence-Based Design, which mainly aimed to explore how we can use larger-scale scientific evidence to small-scale design. This presentation is about one selected studio outcomes. Our site is located in southern downtown in Chicago, and it is adjacent to Chicago River here, and industrial zone, and Chinatown here. So students naturally assume that the site would have the potential to connect this connected area with different functions and would play a role as an interactive hub in terms of sustainable energy and social diversity. And they found 4 issues, which include flood risk because of the Chicago River, and environmental fragmentation, and social disconnection, and lack of accessibility. So for the first scenario of the early adapter, students may suggest creating multiple corridors to increase the accessibility to the site. They expect that some community cluster would be formed eventually in 2050 because of the higher accessibility to the site and increased residential land use and decreased car use in the future. Also, they expect that there would be decrease in industrial land use in here, which is represented as purple, because of the economic change in the future. The second scenario is to apply the current developer's plan, which is to construct the commercial complex in the site. We set this plan as our second scenario, asking what is going to happen in the future if the current plan is just applied. Students thought that because there will be a less pervious surface in the future, the site would be more vulnerable to the flood risk, and there would be a fewer corridor compared to our design suggestion. And as a non-auditor scenario, there will be no connection to the Lake Michigan, also the other area. And they assume that there will be a renewable energy farm, like a solar energy farm, around the site and on the site. So here are our assumptions. Population will increase, and precipitation will increase, and population will grow, and public transportation ridership will increase, which means private car use will decrease. Also, there will be more demand for the renewable energy, and all of these numbers are from the existing research and documentation from the city of Chicago. So based on this assumption, we said seek innovation for water, energy, transportation, mixed-use, green infrastructure, and agriculture. So in response to our 4 goals, we found the 4 potential. First one is to deal with the stormwater issue around the site. Students analyzed the flood vulnerability using the curve number method and found out where would be the best location for green stormwater infrastructure as a blue corridor around the site. And one important issue in Chicago is that there is a huge development gap between north and south. As you can see this map, most of the urban infrastructure and amenity are located at the north of the Chicago. And yeah, also as a third potential, as you can see this interesting map, our site is located between the different ethnic groups. So you can see white lives in the north, and Latino lives in the west, and Asian and black cluster in the south. So our site is just located between these different ethnic groups. So we think that this is our biggest potential. And also, lastly, to increase accessibility, students suggest building a new transit station in the south, and so that there would be a more higher walkability around the site. Students create a design strategy at the multiple scales, from regional to site-specific. After setting one goal, which is higher diversity and net zero, they suggest a regional scale corridor in here. And schematic neighborhood plan as a more smaller scale, and then they made multiple layers of the site-specific plan in terms of accessibility, land use, culture, and geography, which is for urban water and green infrastructure around the site. So we have 2 master plans at different scale. They suggest a multiple corridor to connect this energy, education, water, and green space, etc. And this shows our site-specific master plan, which have a huge green space at the center of the site, which manage and prevent the stormwater flood, stormwater runoff. And wooden area located at the south to connect the existing park in here, and also mixed-use building for commercial and residential are suggested in the north area of the site. So here are impact assessment. For deciding the building FAR and distribution, students calculate the ecosystem service and runoff depths and energy efficiency and compare each plan, like a traditional development plan and developer's plan and our suggestion. And they found that their suggestion is the best in terms of this evaluation. And they ended up with the final design that I showed you in here. And after having final design, using the several quantitative method, they test their suggestion by estimating the amount of solar energy generation and stormwater runoff depth using the curve number method, and greenhouse gas emission with some calculation method, and prove that their suggestion would work better than existing developers' plan in terms of diversity and net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Youngshin. We have moved one presentation from tomorrow morning until this afternoon, and that is going to be a presentation from Tao Wu of the University of Connecticut, and she is going to be talking about coastal resilience planning in Connecticut. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, and I will be the last one, and it will be very quick. Yeah. I'm from University of Connecticut. My focus is on the coastal resilience planning. And this project is part of our big project in Connecticut in 2 counties, 50 towns, and we mainly focus on 15 coastal towns. And New Haven is the kind of typical area I chose for this meeting, but actually we did other 15 towns along the shore area. And in Connecticut, the sea level rise seems like a little bit severe than other areas, than 50 higher than the global level. And it's going to be 20 inches sea level rise to 2050. And this is become legislation in Connecticut. And all the new constructions will consider that data. And if we look at we did some historical research. If we look at the aero map from 1930s to 70s, about 250 acres of open water are converted into urban area. So we not only focus on the flood area problem, we also focus on human activities, how people live in a dangerous way in the coastal area. Then we build, this is our focus. Our requirements consider the global warming and the sea level rise and the extreme weather event. We know California is become drier and drier, but in New England area, extreme precipitation are increasing, and it's 72% higher than before. And for this area, the city wants to change the industrial area into a mixed use area, and more population will emerge here. And we are looking into the clean energy and the green buildings. So I will go into the framework of our job. We did vulnerability analysis first, and we do regional scale analysis and the site scale. And we found potential solutions. We made a matrix for the solutions, almost 30 ways, like flood wall, berm system, and living shoreline, everything. Then we gather stakeholders together. We do interdisciplinary charrette, and we meet the property owners, and we do some public participation. And we collect the feedback to rectify our product and get the decision, to help the decision making. Then we start with a vulnerability analysis. We have more than 100 layers for this site. And if we combine all of them together, we can see nothing. So we categorize them and narrow down into 5 thematic maps. The first elevation, it's high related with flooding. The second one is flood projection. We use the FEMA 100 years flood area, federal emergency management agency, and we use circle projection. Circle is Connecticut Institution for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. And actually our project is part of their whole overarching project. And the yellow buildings are right in the floodplain. And actually they are open water before. We just built building there. And we not only focus on the flood problem, we also focus on the ecosystem, like the natural diversity database, environmental sensitive index, and critical habitats. And we can see actually very low score for this system map. And we focus on some culture and the social part, like the key buildings. We found the place office right in the floodplain, and we found some like the pollution, the sewage treatment factory in this area, and we find some critical like schools, and we also use the social vulnerability index in here. This is our another finding because in New Haven, the industrial area has very low social and economic, very high social vulnerability index score, and kind of it's right in the opportunity zone. I mean, low incomes. Okay. Yeah, and we focus on historic zone to see the resources, cultural resources. And we have this framework, I mean, kind of solutions. We have coastal solutions, like the living shoreline, vegetated berm system, floodgate and flood wall. And inland, if we block the storm surge and the flood water, and there will be inland flooding. So we use some bioretention strategies and pervious pavement. We use some regulation categories like the elevated building or some green building strategy. And this is before. The FEMA-based flood elevation is 11, but the overall site are just below that data. And in the future, plus 20 inches, about 2 feet, it's gonna be flooded all industrial area and residential area. We use the first barrier of living shoreline and the berm system, then using bioretention strategies inside. This is our innovation ways, like the first barrier, living shoreline, to reduce the energy of the storm surge. The second barrier to block the flood water, and inside a lot of bioretention ways. And we not only to mitigate the flood hazard, but we want to encourage some green building and the use of clean energy and renewable energy in the future, and stimulate some social and economical development and vitality in this area. This is our interactive design phase. Actually, we not only focus on New Haven, we choose 3 towns and let people to choose the towns they are familiar with. We made this very cute model kits for people. It really was a lot of fun there, and people like using the Lego kits to show, to express their solutions, and that's far. It's not enough. They write a lot of suggestions and some problems we didn't notice, so it's very helpful. And we include many stakeholders like the government. And I only want to share one thing. In New London project, many people, especially the property owner, they really hate us. They hate each other because they don't want to change. They don't trust the scientists. They don't believe climate change. But after every month's meeting, they began to accept our idea. Like at first they don't like the flood wall, but don't like the berm system. But finally, they accept to elevate the road, and because that will get the federal funding from DOT. So I'm thinking this is the most meaningful part, that people know each other and support each other and face their common problems. Thank you.